still can't believe you did that.
I know, it was crazy, right?
Vanessa rushed back home for her forgotten passport, expecting an empty house. But the moment she stepped inside, she heard voices upstairs, her husband's laugh mixed with another woman's. Her world shattered in an instant. What happened next would change everything she thought she knew about her life, her marriage, and herself. The morning had started like any other perfect day in the Brooks household. Vanessa stood in their gleaming kitchen, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked their manicured lawn in one of Virginia's most exclusive suburbs. At 34, she had everything she'd worked for: a stunning home, a successful career as a corporate consultant, and Gregory, her husband of 6 years, who was pouring her coffee with that charming smile that had first captured her heart at a networking event years ago. She'd worked twice as hard as anyone else to get here. Being a black woman in boardrooms full of people who looked nothing like her meant constantly proving herself, constantly being excellent, constantly suppressing parts of herself to fit in. But she'd done it. She'd made it. And as Gregory kissed her forehead and wished her luck on her Atlanta business trip, everything seemed worth it. The cab was already halfway to Dulles International when Vanessa's stomach dropped. Her passport. She could see it clearly in her mind, sitting on her nightstand where she'd left it after checking the expiration date last night. She called Gregory immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. Then again. And again. He'd mentioned something about back-to-back meetings, so she wasn't surprised, just frustrated. The cab driver, sympathetic to her panic, turned around without complaint. 45 minutes later, Vanessa's key turned in the lock of her front door. The house was quiet, exactly as she'd expected. Gregory's car wasn't in the driveway, which was odd, but maybe he'd parked in the garage. She stepped into the foyer, her heels clicking against the marble floor, and that's when she heard it. Laughter. A woman's voice, light and carefree, floating down from the second floor. Then Gregory's unmistakable laugh, the one that used to make her heart flutter. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she stood frozen, her mind racing through impossible explanations. A colleague, a surprise party planner, his sister visiting unannounced. But deep in her gut, she already knew. Some truths announce themselves before your mind can catch up, a cold knowing that spreads through your chest like ice water. She moved to the stairs, each step feeling like walking through water. Her hand gripped the banister, knuckles tight, as the voices grew clearer. The woman's voice was saying something about Morocco, about how divine the resort was going to be. Morocco. The trip Gregory had told Vanessa he couldn't take with her next month because of work commitments. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. Vanessa's hand trembled as she pushed it open. The scene before her would replay in her mind for months afterward, every detail crystalline and cruel. Gregory, her husband, sitting on their bed in a casual intimacy that spoke of familiarity, of routine. And beside him, wearing one of Vanessa's silk robes like it belonged to her, was Christine Aldridge. Christine, the wife of Preston Aldridge, owner of the largest real estate development firm in the state and Gregory's most important client. Christine, with her platinum blonde hair and her family's old money and her position on every important charity board in their social circle. Christine, who had always looked at Vanessa with a particular kind of smile at country club functions, the kind that never quite reached her eyes. The room went silent. Gregory's face drained of color. Christine, however, barely flinched. She took a slow sip from a wine glass, Vanessa's wine glass from her wedding china, and sighed with what sounded almost like annoyance. "Oh, this is awkward," Christine said, her voice carrying that cultivated smoothness that came from generations of private schools and debutante balls. "Gregory, handle this. Handle this." Like Vanessa was a problem to be managed, an inconvenience to be dealt with. Gregory stood, hands raised in a gesture that might have been placating but looked more like surrender. His mouth opened and closed, words failing him in a way Vanessa had never seen before. He'd always been so articulate, so confident. But now, caught, he was stammering like a child. "Vanessa, I can explain. It's not what you think." But Christine cut him off, standing with a languid grace and tightening the robe around her waist. "Honestly, Vanessa, don't make this into some tragic drama. These things happen. Did you really think he'd stay satisfied?" She paused, her eyes traveling over Vanessa in a way that made her skin crawl. "You're lovely, of course, but, well, you know how these things are. Men like Gregory have certain needs, certain expectations." The casual cruelty of it took Vanessa's breath away, but it was what Christine said next that cut deepest, her voice dropping into something that pretended to be sympathetic but dripped with condescension. "Women like you are wonderful for the business optics, darling. Gregory's firm looks so progressive with you on his arm at events, but men like him need something softer at home, something more traditional, less intimidating." She smiled then, a razor blade wrapped in silk. "Surely you understand. Women like you." The words hung in the air, loaded with everything Christine wouldn't say directly but wanted Vanessa to hear. The racism wasn't in her face or shouted from her lips. It was in the subtle suggestion that Vanessa was somehow inherently wrong for Gregory's world, that her ambition was threatening, that she could never truly belong no matter how perfect she made herself. And Gregory, her husband who'd promised to love and protect her, said nothing. He stood there, silent, letting Christine's words fill the space where his defense of his wife should have been. That silence hurt more than the affair itself. It was a confirmation of every fear Vanessa had secretly carried, every moment she'd wondered if she was truly accepted or merely tolerated in the life they'd built. Vanessa didn't scream. She didn't cry, not yet. She simply turned and walked out, her legs moving on autopilot as she descended the stairs, crossed the foyer, and stepped back into the blinding afternoon sun. She got into her car and drove, not knowing where she was going, just needing to move, to put distance between herself and the wreckage of her life. She found herself in Southeast D.C., in the neighborhood where she'd grown up, where her grandmother had raised her in a small apartment after her parents died. The building looked the same, a little more worn perhaps, but still standing. Vanessa parked across the street and finally let herself break. The sobs came in waves, shaking her entire body, years of holding herself together coming undone all at once. Her phone buzzed. Kenji, her best friend since college, the one person who'd known her before she'd become the polished version of herself that fit into Gregory's world. She answered, could barely speak through the tears, but didn't need to. Kenji just said, "Stay there. I'm coming." And 20 minutes later wrapped her in a hug that felt like coming home. That night in Kenji's guest room, Vanessa made a decision. She wouldn't just disappear quietly, wouldn't let Gregory's betrayal define her ending. But she also realized how precarious her position was. The house was owned by Gregory's family trust. Her high-paying consulting job had come through Gregory's connections. Her entire life had been built in spaces where she was always, on some level, a guest. The next morning, trying to hold herself together with coffee and concealer, Vanessa went to her office. She had a major client presentation, had been preparing for weeks, but when she walked into the conference room, she felt the shift immediately. Her boss, Mr. Harrison, who'd always been cordial if distant, looked at her with something new in his eyes. Pity mixed with discomfort. The presentation went well, she made sure of that, but afterward Harrison pulled her aside. "Vanessa, I heard about some personal troubles. Gregory mentioned you've been under a lot of stress lately, that things at home have been difficult." The implication was clear. Gregory was already rewriting the narrative, painting himself as the long-suffering husband of an unstable wife. Over the next week, everything unraveled with terrifying speed. Vanessa was strongly encouraged to take stress leave from her position. Gregory's lawyer served divorce papers with a prenuptial agreement that left her with almost nothing. He'd frozen their joint accounts. She had to move out of the house, ended up in a modest one-bedroom apartment that felt like a prison after the spacious home she'd lost. But the worst humiliation came when she went to the country club to collect her personal items from her locker. She'd forgotten it was the day of Christine's charity luncheon. The dining room was full of women in designer dresses and perfect hair, And when Vanessa walked in, the conversation seemed to pause for just a moment before continuing, but louder, more deliberate. Christine's voice carried across the room. Some people just don't know when they're out of their depth. Gregory deserves someone who understands his world, his needs. It's really for the best. The women around her laughed, some uncomfortably, but they laughed. No one spoke up. No one met Vanessa's eyes, except for one woman. Mrs. Lancaster, a stern-looking white woman in her 60s who Vanessa had seen at club functions but never really spoken to, watched the entire scene with an expression Vanessa couldn't quite read. But she said nothing, and Vanessa left with what remained of her dignity barely intact. The weeks that followed were the darkest of Vanessa's life. She took freelance consulting jobs, barely making rent. She felt like she'd lost everything, not just her marriage, but her entire identity. She'd worked so hard to build a life that felt successful and secure, and it had all been stripped away, revealing how little of it had ever truly been hers. On a particularly difficult Tuesday, Vanessa found herself at a community center in her old neighborhood. She'd started volunteering there, partly to stay busy, partly because she needed to remember who she'd been before she'd tried so hard to become someone else. That's where she met Mrs. Lorraine Patterson, a woman in her 70s who ran youth mentorship programs with more passion than funding. Mrs. Patterson was in crisis. The center had a chance at a major grant, $500,000 that would secure their future, but the proposal was due in 48 hours, and the consultant they'd hired had disappeared with their deposit. She was sitting in her small office surrounded by scattered papers, looking defeated in a way that broke Vanessa's heart. "I can help," Vanessa heard herself say. Mrs. Patterson looked up, skeptical but desperate. "I used to write these proposals for Fortune 500 companies. I know what wins grants." Vanessa spent the next 3 nights working with an intensity she hadn't felt in months. She poured everything into that proposal, using every skill she'd honed in corporate boardrooms to tell the story of these kids who deserved a chance, who needed advocates, who were brilliant and capable if someone would just invest in them. She didn't ask for payment. The work itself felt like remembering how to breathe. When the grant came through, fully funded, Mrs. Patterson cried. She told everyone she knew about Vanessa, about her brilliance and generosity. Word spread through the community. A woman named Deshawn Miller, who owned a growing Black-owned tech startup, reached out. She'd heard about Vanessa's work and needed someone with her expertise to help scale her business. Working with Deshawn felt different from anything Vanessa had done before. The work mattered. They weren't maximizing shareholder value or optimizing profit margins for companies that didn't need the help. They were building something that would employ people from the community, that would create generational wealth for families who'd never had it. When Deshawn's company landed a massive contract, more Black-owned businesses wanted Vanessa's help. She started her own consulting firm focused entirely on uplifting minority-owned businesses. The money was good, but more than that, the work felt meaningful in a way her old corporate job never had. She was building something real, something that couldn't be taken away because it was rooted in purpose rather than performance. 3 months later, Vanessa was invited to give a keynote speech at a regional business conference about innovative approaches to economic development. Standing on that stage, looking out at hundreds of faces, she felt powerful in a way she never had in Gregory's world. This power came from within, not from who she was married to or which club she belonged to. In the audience, she noticed Mrs. Lancaster from the country club. After the speech, the older woman approached with an expression Vanessa couldn't quite read. "That was extraordinary," Mrs. Lancaster said. "I've been following your work. I should introduce myself properly. Catherine Lancaster. I'm the CEO of Lancaster Industries." Vanessa's surprise must have shown. Lancaster Industries was one of the largest investment firms on the East Coast, managing billions in assets. This woman, who she'd only known as a country club member, was a business titan. "I was there that day," Mrs. Lancaster continued, her voice quiet but firm. "When Christine humiliated you. I saw everything, heard everything. I've spent 40 years in rooms full of Christines and Gregories, watching talented people, Especially talented women of color get pushed aside. I'm tired of it. She handed Vanessa a business card. I want to offer you a partnership, a $10 million investment fund for minority-owned businesses, with you as director, full autonomy, full equity. Let's build something better than the world those people created. 6 months after that, Vanessa's fund was thriving. She'd invested in 12 businesses, created over 200 jobs, and her story had been featured in a major business magazine. The article went viral, not just in business circles, but across social media, her journey resonating with people who'd ever felt like they didn't belong in spaces they'd earned the right to occupy. That's when Gregory showed up at her new office. He looked terrible, the polished charm replaced with something haggard and desperate. The affair with Christine had imploded spectacularly when it came out that she'd been using him to get inside information on his client's real estate plans for her husband's firm. His reputation was destroyed. He'd lost his biggest clients, and his firm had let him go. I made a terrible mistake, he said, standing in her doorway like a ghost of their past life. Vanessa, please. I need your help. I need you to forgive me. Vanessa looked at him. This man she'd loved. This man who'd let someone disrespect her in the cruelest ways, who'd tried to destroy her career to protect his own image. She felt something unexpected. Not rage, not even satisfaction at his downfall, but a profound sense of freedom. You tried to erase me because you were ashamed of where I came from, she said quietly. But those roots, that community you thought made me less than, that's what made me strong. You threw away something real for something that was never yours to begin with. She stood, walked to her office door, and held it open. I hope you find yourself, Gregory. I hope you learn that a person's worth isn't measured by their social status or the color of their skin. But that's no longer my concern. I have work to do. 2 weeks later, Vanessa stood at the grand reopening of the community center. The building had been renovated, expanded, filled with new computers and art supplies and opportunities. Mrs. Patterson gave a speech, her voice trembling with emotion as she talked about the young people whose lives had been changed, about the power of community, about what's possible when someone believes in you. On the wall behind her was a photo collage, pictures of the businesses Vanessa had helped grow, the families who'd achieved stability, the young people who'd received mentorships and scholarships. In the center was a quote Vanessa had chosen: "Your worth isn't determined by those who underestimate you." As she looked at those faces, Vanessa thought about the woman she'd been the day she came home to find her life destroyed. That woman had thought she needed to be smaller, quieter, more palatable to be worthy of love and success. She'd spent years trying to fit into a world that would never fully accept her, no matter how perfect she made herself. But losing everything had freed her to build something better, something rooted in truth rather than performance, something that couldn't be taken away because it came from within. Vanessa lost everything that day she came home early, her marriage, her home, her old life. But in losing what wasn't real, she found what was: her purpose, her community, and her power. Sometimes the worst betrayal leads to the greatest transformation. Never let anyone dim your light. Because your worth isn't determined by those who underestimate you. The people who dismiss you, who try to make you small, are revealing their own insecurities, not your value. Sometimes you have to lose everything built on shaky ground to build something unshakable. Stand in your truth, lift as you climb, and remember, the tables always turn for those with integrity, and when they do, make sure you're building a better table for everyone who comes after you.